Hey there, welcome to the introduction, really, to the art education unit plan. I'm going to give you an example, and I'm also going to talk through what's on the unit plan itself. You can see my example over here is the making an entrance unit. This is the same one that you're doing, but here it's been reimagined as if it was for high school at a proficient or what we might think of as a beginning level. So up at the top here, you can see it says title of unit, such as making an entrance, your name here, Jason Cox. Insert a picture of an example project you created here. We're going to come back to example projects later, but it doesn't hurt you to do it now, or at least do a couple of roughs. You don't have to get it right the first time, but making an example project helps you figure out what you're asking of the student, how long it's going to take, what you're going to need to do it. It's never a bad idea to get started as early as you can. Age and grade level. Now for mine, like I said, it's high school proficient, but for you, you really want to add somewhere pre-K to 6. The number of students, you can just put 20 for now. It'll vary a little bit depending on the class. Time per lesson, you could just put 50 minutes, same as I did. And number of lessons. 3 is a good amount to use. If you're ever dealing with EdTPA wants you to do 3. And it's normally just a good length of time for most of the main concepts you could get across. When you're dealing with secondary education, sometimes you'll do something longer because they'll have art more often if it's an advanced course, or because you're dealing with more complex concepts or more independence. But for our purposes, keep it around 3 to 5 right now. Central focus of the lesson or the big idea. This is the main concept. This is why you're doing it. This is why it matters. This is the summary you would find on the book jacket, or if you were looking at it as a movie online, how they would get you to want to go see that movie. And it says 3 to 5 sentences that summarize the main concept being taught in the lesson. It should describe what students are doing, why they're doing it, and how you will know they've grasped the lesson. Over on mine, it says students will create a drawing, painting, collage, or combination thereof that represents their identity, 1, and 2, incorporates the idea of a door in some way. The work can be abstract, representational, literal, or symbolic. At the conclusion of the assignment, the student must provide an artist statement that describes their thinking and their process. So the what is actually the action of making it. And the why ends up being a representation of the identity. The door is kind of a limitation that's meant to help them focus. Sometimes we think that having no limitations is the ideal way. You just give someone paper and a pencil and say, go to. But that rarely actually works. What you get there is what we call the terror of the blank page, where students are more likely to freeze up. Another reason that you can put in for them doing it is actually the words that follow. Even though I open it up and say abstract, representational, literal, or symbolic, it's introducing all those vocabulary terms, all those ideas. And at the conclusion, you have the work itself as well as the artist statement as tools to be assessing it by. Theory and research. Write 3 to 5 sentences that describe how an educational theory relates to the lesson. Some theorists include Dewey, Gardner, Vygotsky, Piaget, Lowenfeld, and Montessori. I did put up a short description of a whole bunch of theorists online. You are welcome to look at them. But it's really only the most basic introduction to those people. I do suggest looking a little bit further into them in order to make sure that you're representing their theory correctly. You don't have to go too into detail with this right now. It is there because by the time you get to being assessed as your readiness for teaching on EdTPA, you will need to be able to draw on theory a little bit more. So this is just the beginning. I don't want you to be overly fixated on it, but I do want you to think about it a little bit. Most of the time in art, we are looking at constructivists. Constructivists is the idea, or constructivism rather, is the idea that your conception of knowledge meets a new idea, a new conception, something that's just a little bit more complex than what you already know, And when those two things meet, you construct your new understanding. So it's a series of plateaus. Dewey is one of the well known constructivists, so is Vygotsky. And so those are good people to look to begin if you're not too sure, but do give them a read before just claiming them as your own. Over on my example, you can see I wrote, this unit is constructivist in that the prompt is intentionally broad to allow students to select a way of working that they feel some comfort with, and then to build a more complex understanding of how visual arts function on top of that understanding. This is also broadly Vygotsky's idea, what we call the zone of proximal development. Further down, you can see I've got visual art standards. I posted online the standards from Ohio. Ohio divides them into these four sections: creating, producing, responding, connecting, and you can see I've put a description about what each of those areas mean. I tend to avoid going past five. I might put six. But remember, if you claim to be teaching it, you also have to assess it. So those things are going to go back and forth. And however you're writing these, you can look back up at your central focus and make sure that whatever you're claiming to do ties back into the ideas you put up there. Here, you can see I listed them by the code that they are put online. Since this is high school proficient, that's where the HSP comes in. And then point to CR for creating. Explore multiple solutions to artistic problems, identify visual literacy strategies as a means to communicate concepts, demonstrate increasing skill with materials and techniques, increase relevant vocabulary to describe and analyze components related to visual art, engage with self-assessment to set and monitor goals to document personal growth, examine personal and social contexts related to works of art. Now, something I have to tell you here that I feel like you probably observed. A lot of this uses big words to try to make itself look important. If you look at these concepts, they're not all that difficult to grasp what we're trying to get across, what we want them to look like. And there's a lot of ways to getting to these end goals. We'll come back to it a little bit later in our procedure section. Going down to our SLOs. And this is where we're going to stop today. I suggest using words from the depth of knowledge, it's listed as DOK, or Bloom's taxonomy and content standards to help guide your creation of measurable student learning outcomes that illustrate the standards. So the standards you listed above should have some kind of a reflection in the SLOs that you're writing. I give a couple examples. You do not have to use the ones I have. You can come up with your own. These are just a couple I put down there. Go over to mine. So if you look at this, you can see I actually have less student learning outcomes than I had standards. That's because some of the standards I tied into two of them into one outcome. So students will create an image that represents their identity. Students will experiment with their choice of medium chosen from one of the following: drawing, painting, collage, or a combination thereof. And students will write an artist statement about their work using the vocabulary presented in the class. The statement will explain their choices, process, and how the work reflects their own identity. If I scroll back up, you can probably find where those are paralleling. So exploring the solutions to the artistic problems comes into that creating an image. Visual literacy strategies ends up going back into that identity thing. It actually also comes across a little bit in their artist statement. Demonstrate increasing skill with materials and techniques. Largely is how they're actually working with the media rather than planning with the media. To increase the vocabulary comes out in the artist statement. Engage with self-assessment is both in the artist statement, but it's also in something I put in called the student journals, where I'm having them write down what they have achieved every day and also writing down what they hope to achieve in lesson. And the last one says examine personal and social contexts related to works of art, and obviously some of the concepts about identity in that. All right, that's our starting. I hope you found it informative. Let me know if you have any questions. Shoot me an email, and I'll talk to you again soon.